Welcome to the Informal Game. My name's Griff. I got Chris behind the camera. Today, I just want to talk about a little trick that some of the best DMs I've ever played with use, and it's really simple, so stay tuned. So I'm not going to draw this out if I can help it. I'm just going to talk about one simple thing that all DMs use, which is reaction rolls. And the ones I use, the reaction rolls I use come out of the original books here. And it's a really simple system. You can use it, I think you can plug it into any game you have. You're playing a sci-fi game, you need reaction rolls. You're playing a horror game, you need reaction rolls. You name it, you need some way to sort of dictate without railroading what the monsters or the other people do that are NPCs in the game. And so I just want to get right into it. Let's talk about these reaction rolls. You got these three basic books. The first one talks about one part of the system. It's kind of interesting because the way they designed the game, they really expected people to home rule their game because that was the style of play back then. People talk about how incomplete the rules are. I talk about it too. But I think it was maybe even intentional that they just put in a framework and then it was expected that every dungeon master would do their own thing with the rules. So on page 12 here, there's this simple system for non-player characters, and this discusses hiring non-player characters because that was kind of a big thing, was having hirelings in the party. And I won't read it all. It just basically says people will probably want to hire hirelings to fight for them on dungeon adventures and help them out. What they do here is they have this little chart. I'll slide it up. And this little chart is really simple. It just talks about, you roll a die roll, and that's the reaction an NPC would have if you were trying to convince them to join your party somehow, hire them, pay them to do it, or maybe offer them a share of the treasure for an equal share of the danger. And so the system is designed to use a simple 2-die roll, which is interesting because before Dungeons & Dragons, character attributes were rolled. The ability scores were rolled with a 2d6 roll in Blackmoor. So if you look at the chart, it's just simple. You roll a 2, it says attempts to attack. 3 to 5, it's a hostile reaction. 6 to 8 is uncertain. 9 to 11 accepts the offer, and 12 is enthusiastic. Loyalty plus 3, there's a loyalty chart. But we're not going to talk about loyalty. But the other part here, which is where you get into nuance, where it's up to the players and the referee to sort of make this more than just a dice game. We're role-playing. We're pretending it's a real situation. The person I'm talking to doesn't seem like they're completely convinced by what I'm saying. So I go, well, how about if I pay you an extra 100 gold pieces? And it says here, an uncertain reaction leaves the door open to additional reward offers, but scores under 6 do not. I'd still leave it open to a little bonus. So that's kind of the system for hiring people. But I think interpreting what's in this section creates a much more nuanced system when you go to the third book here, the Underworld and Wilderness, which is basically this would be like the Dungeon Master's Guide for the original game, which is, this is your Dungeon Master's Guide, okay, right here. It's this tiny little thing. 36 pages. Whew, a lot to read there. Sounds complicated. And again, it's on page 12. You go to this page, and you have random actions by monsters. And once again, you have sort of this spread of 2 to 5, negative, 6 to 8, uncertain, 9 to 12, positive. So this is really the core. Well, they kind of overlap. If you want to make it more nuanced, they overlap. But this is still the basic system of reaction rolls. We're talking about the same die roll with 2d6, right? One thing you really want to think about, and I don't know if all DMs think about this, but dice rolls were talked a lot about back in the old days. And if you look at the way the dice are set up, I'll just write it down for you here. You've got the bottom of your scale is 12, the top of your 2, the top of your scale is 12. What that creates is a uneven set of numbers with 7 in the middle, right? because you can't get a 1 on 2d6. And then you have 3, 4, 5, 6, 8, 9, 10, 11. It goes to 11. So you've got this set of probabilities or values that you get out of combinations with these 2 dice. Well, only one set of combinations produces a 2, right? We got this right here. I'll just stick it down here. Well, there's one, so that you can go like, okay, one set of combinations of numbers produces a 2. Only one set produces a 12. And you can go through this stack. Like 3 is either a 2 and a 1, or the other way around, 2 and a 1, or 1 and a 2. So you have 2 chances of getting a 3. When you go to 4, it just goes up like a stack like this. Each one is one more probability, one more chance of that combination coming up with that value. So you'll notice that 7 is the most likely combination. So hang in there with me while I draw this out. I promise it's worth paying attention to. We got, what it creates is a pyramid. You look down here. You've probably heard of like bell curves on probabilities. When you have 2d6, you just get kind of a pyramid effect like this. Now, if you look at these probabilities and you combine the 2 charts, one was kind of, I don't know, it's strange how they arrange them. I just play it and kind of have added my own system on top of it over the years. But your chances of having absolute hostility are just 1 out of, if you total these, you'll get 36 chances. And your chance of having absolute delight and loyalty over seeing you is also 1 out of 36. They broke it up. I believe it was, I want to say it was 6 to 8 was the intermediate. Where is that? Got to look it up here. Oh yeah, that's the right book. If you look in the Underworld and Wilderness, yeah, it's 2 to 5 is the range for negative, but there's like a really extreme negative on the end, which the probability of getting a 2 is like something like a 1.2% or something like that, if I remember correctly. I used to know all the probabilities, so I could make up percentile rolls using 2d6 just by choosing different numbers. It's kind of fun. And then looking at the book, it goes up to 8 for uncertain, and then you've got 9, 10, 11. So that kind of gives you an idea of different reactions you can get. The other thing that you can get in reactions is a certain bias. And so if you run into a bunch of orcs, right? Orcs don't like humans. It's just the way it is, at least in the rules I play. So you run into orcs, they're not going to like humans, and what I do is I put a bias in there, which is like a cultural bias, because like it's sort of like the orcs are like the bikers, and you guys are the guys from the burbs coming to Orkville. You walk into their bar, and they're going to be like, who the hell is that guy, right? So there's going to be a bias. So I do a -1 or a plus, or a -2 actually, or a +2. What's interesting about using a +2 or a -2 is that when you look at this graph, here we have uncertainty. Well, you're running into orcs, and they get a -2. If you roll a 7, which is the most common roll, it's going to slide that over -2 to a 5, which is a hostile roll. So it means it shifts the chance of a positive reaction over by a couple slots. The same happens if you run into, I don't know, you're going through the dungeon, you see a paladin, and he looks at you and he goes like, oh, you got elves, you got magic users, none of you is wearing skulls on their, skull belt buckles and stuff. You don't look evil. So there's going to be a +2, so your average roll is a 7. He's going to be in favorable land most of the time. The other thing that's interesting about this system, if you look at the, I don't know if you watched the video I did on really simple record keeping for dungeon dives and things like that. One of the things I do is you're logging turns as you're playing, and then you run into something, and I will write like you're at room, say you're in the dungeon, it's like you're at room number 5, and then I'll also write like the monster name. So let's say we ran into some orcs in room number 5, and what happens now is that we need to decide what the reaction is, the initial reaction. So we roll our dice. Ooh-hoo-hoo-hoo. These are orcs. Subtract 2. We got, well, we can get a 1 as a modifier. So these orcs are really hostile. So that would be one way to see, what's going on in the dungeon. So these orcs are just, they're going to be enraged. Maybe you're going to say, like, these guys are so enraged at seeing humans down in their place that they're going to attack, and they might even go berserk and get a +2 on all their attacks for like 1 to 6 combat rounds, because they're in a rage. So that's one way to deal with this. So let's say that we run into another encounter. Original Dungeons & Dragons has cool stuff in here. Like, I talk about this maybe in another video. Maybe I haven't gotten to that yet. But they use random encounters a lot. I think I talked about it in the How to Make a Dungeon video. The random encounters, which also come up in the monster manual here, are generated based on simple die rolls, what level you're on, and then you roll a die to determine what level monster you run into, and then you roll on these charts. And they're very simple charts. There weren't a ton of monsters back then. And so that's kind of an interesting aspect to the game. In fact, this random reaction roll system is ideal for using like a wandering monster roll. You come up with a monster, you roll a die, you get a 1. It means there's a monster down there that's wandering around the halls, and the party's about to run into it. So the first thing you do is you roll for the reaction. So let's say we run into another set of orcs, or maybe some goblins. Let's say we got some goblins, okay? And these are just wandering goblins. They're not in a room. They're not part of the dungeon as far as the descriptions provided for everything in the dungeon. They're just cruising through, and they just happen to come upon you. So you do another roll, and once again, you have a situation where let's say, well, I'll try a roll. Let's see if I can get a positive roll. No, not getting positive. Oh, there we go. So a 10, actually be hard with the bias. I might have to roll 11. So let's just pretend we got an 11. So I would write down that I got an 11 there. Or maybe let's do the 10. Actually, the 10 is more interesting, because if I got a 10 and then I put the -2 bias roll on there because they're a different alignment, they're a different species, they're not sure what you're up to. Now we've got their reaction is in the range of uncertain, which is an 8. And this is where the monsters don't always take the initiative. So these goblins are kind of uncertain, and they're just kind of checking you out. They're like, okay, what are these humans going to do? Because you can never trust a human. They're just filthy, and nobody likes them. So the humans, your players, the humans and the elves and other party members, it's up to them to decide what they want to do. And when you're running a dungeon, players have 3 options. They can talk to something, they can fight it, or they can run away from it. Let's say the players decide they're going to do the international gesture of Parlay. You hold up your hand, your sword hand, empty, and you show that you're not carrying a weapon. Goblins might look at that and they're like, okay, that's interesting. So the addition of that gesture, which says we would like to parlay, slides their reaction +2 over. So now we're in positive land. I just add a 2, and now the goblin reaction is at a 10. That value is within the positive range, and the goblins will be like, okay, let's figure out what the humans want to say to us. We'll listen to what they got to say. I'm a goblin. I'll talk to you. What do you want, human? And it's at that point that you can engage in talking to the goblins. And that's kind of a real change from, when I was a kid, I wasn't that nuanced in my games when I was a teenager. We just went down to the dungeon. We slaughtered everything, and that was fun. We loved it. But as you get older, you want a little bit more subtlety in your games. And so that's another aspect of what you saw in those charts, because it had like a range that kind of went from, you've got hostile over here, and you've got a question mark in the middle, and you've got friendly over here. And that's really limited. The idea of hostile means combat. The first chart you saw in the first book, the way it talked about reactions, it was just like an immediate attempts to attack, right? And so I think these two charts kind of talk to each other, even though they're in different sections, because they deal with a similar thing. Once you enter a parlay stage of wanting to interact with an NPC, you're kind of in the like hiring sort of mode instead of just trying to find out what the NPC is going to do. And so you start to get a little bit more nuanced when you have like an imbalanced encounter, or an encounter with something that really should never be friendly with you. And so when you're rolling a 2 and it's orcs, maybe they do just attack. But let's say you run into a group of goblins like we have here, but there's only 3 of them, and they are down the tunnel in the darkness, and they see this party of adventurers, and they start counting, and they're like, oh, it looks like there's at least 9 to 12 humans in that party, and there's only 3 of us. Their reaction, because they're not stupid, right? You got to think like a monster. If I was a monster and I saw a big group of humans down there and there were only 3 of us, my negative reaction would mean that I just turn around and go back down the tunnel. So in a lot of cases, your players may not even see intelligent creatures. If it's something like centipedes or giant spiders or something that's sort of mindless and robotic, they're going to attack, right? But something like a goblin or any other sentient sort of creature might just disappear into the darkness. And since the players are carrying torches in the underworld and the monsters aren't, you're going to see them run the opposite direction. So hostile can also just become fear. If you go to the other extreme, I'm just using the extremes because those are really the ones where you see the most nuance in creating encounters. If you go to like friendly and you get a 12, which is just, yay, I love you. For some reason, I just look at you and I want to be your friend, right? This is great if you're running into another human. They're like, yeah, this guy looks like, or this group of people, they look like people we can trust. Maybe we'll even join their party and go on, continue our adventure with them. But when you run into something like, once again, goblins, well, they're gonna, or even trolls. In fact, I can describe an encounter I had where I had trolls. My players were going, it wasn't even in the dungeon either. It was out in the wilderness. They were on this winding road through the mountains, and it was a steep, it wasn't like a vertical drop, but if you slid off, you'd slide for 500 feet because there was just no way to stop yourself. And it was the same above the path. So they're going through this path, and up ahead they see rocks rolling down onto the path. And they're like, what's going on here? And they look up, and there's a bunch of mountain trolls. And they're not really sure what the mountain trolls are doing, whether they're like chasing something or maybe they're just playing, who knows. But all of a sudden, the mountain trolls all turn and look at the party. Well, the reaction roll came up really high. I rolled 2 dice and got a really high number. So instead of it being an attack, because an attack would be like a low roll, the reaction roll was curiosity, so they're interested. It's interest, I guess would be a good way to describe it. They're not really friendly, but they're up in the mountains. There's nothing up here. Humans have come up. Maybe the humans have some food with them, right? So the trolls come tumbling down to the path ahead of them, and one of them, the leader, comes up, and leader's like, you troll. And so the players are like, well, this is a bad place to get into a fight. We could just slip off the path and die. Let's talk to the troll. What does the troll want? And the troll is interested. And what the troll is interested in is something that they can use. And what they can always use, because trolls are just voracious, is food. So they want to negotiate for food. Unfortunately, the food that they want to negotiate for is the hobbit that's in the party. And the troll points and is like, how much do you want for the little one? And so the players have to negotiate their way out of having the troll want to buy a hobbit from them because they want to eat the hobbit, and convince the troll that all they want is like a bunch of nasty tasting iron rations instead, to let them go by without having a fight. So that was kind of an interesting encounter, and it was all driven by looking at these dice and seeing what they do on this simple chart, the simple system that we have here in this book, or rather the other book, kind of a combo of the two. I think the best DMs, like I said at the beginning of the video, the best DMs have little tricks they use, and most of those little tricks are super simple, and they come from having been playing a long time and referencing a variety of rules that they're familiar with, and not necessarily even these rules. There are, tunnels and trolls. There's a lot of different systems. RuneQuest, all these really early systems, but they all had something like this in there to let a DM roll their dice and kind of treat their dice like tea leaves, because there's no way you can track everything mathematically and convert every interaction in a game into die rolls, and we don't want that anyway because we're not playing computer games, we're playing role-playing games. But good DMs can look at the die rolls, and it just sparks an idea and creates an interesting encounter that the players can interact with. But now with this sort of quadrant I've set up of like the hostile creatures are either fearful, well, they're either hostile or fearful or friendly or just interested, and they're mostly interested in getting some sort of benefit to them. They want to negotiate for something they might need. It's a simple way to create more complex encounters in your game. It's funny because Chris and I talk a lot about gaming stuff like this, and the other night we had a huge discussion. We get really deep and philosophical about the rules and how we want to use the rules, and we're both really into kind of minimalistic systems. And he was talking about how our last game session, he wasn't sure what to do, and he just took some dice and he just rolled them, and he just looked at the dice, and the dice said, well, this is more however the situation should be. And he just paused to think about it, and he was like, well, the most interesting possibility is if this particular thing happens. And this is like what I was talking about. The dice are like tea leaves. They will guide you and tell you what best decision you have already in your head, because it's really up to you to invent the adventure. But you don't want to railroad your players. You want to give them options. And so you're creating options, and then you're using the dice to sort of expand on those options. I think that's worth thinking about. Let us know what you think in the comments. There's always all kinds of fun discussion going on in the comments for these videos. Thanks for checking in. We'll see you next time on The Informal Game.